He ordered the cheapest boxed meal in the store, but when it came time to pay, he realized he was still 10 cents short. Having not eaten all day, he pleaded with the owner to cut him some slack, offering to sing a song for everyone in return. But to his surprise, the owner looked at him with utter disdain, tossed the meal into the dish sink, and would rather throw it away as trash than let him take a single bite. With no choice, he pocketed his coins and left in embarrassment, though his heart was filled with bitterness. All because James was a homeless man. In this indifferent society, no one spared him a shred of respect. That night, he could only keep rummaging through garbage bins, hoping to find something barely edible to fill his stomach. But fate hadn't completely abandoned him. The next day, while singing on the street, James spotted his father, Jack, shopping across the road. He hurried over to greet him.
Dad? Dad? Hey, Dad. What are you doing here?
In truth, Jack had already noticed James, but he quickened his pace, pretending not to see. James realized this too, yet still approached him with a forced smile, making the atmosphere painfully awkward. But faced with the rare chance of a full meal, James wasn't going to let the opportunity slip away. Just as he was about to speak, his stepmother, Hillary, appeared at that very moment.
Coming together. Christmas dinner. Right, Dad?
Well, I wish we'd known. Unfortunately, our table's full, so...
Always room for one more at Christmas.
For a brief moment, his father's guilt flickered. But to Hillary, James was nothing more than a disease. His very presence made her uncomfortable. Any thought of a family Christmas gathering was simply out of the question. Perhaps out of guilt, Jack slipped James a bill before leaving, adding a polite remark.
Maybe New Year's, okay?
But that casual remark ignited a spark of hope in James. He believed his father was simply embarrassed to invite him in front of Hillary. If he took the initiative, maybe he could join them for Christmas dinner after all. Looking at the warm and cozy house, James saw that his father now had 2 more daughters. He couldn't help but feel envious. With gifts in hand and hope in his heart, he knocked on the door. Jack's face was a mix of discomfort and helplessness. But on New Year's Eve, how could he possibly kick his own son out? Unfortunately, his stepsisters had no intention of being polite to this uninvited guest.
And Mummy doesn't like you. Mummy says you're a junkie.
The once festive atmosphere quickly descended into chaos. With more guests arriving soon, Jack had no choice but to ask James to leave. James knew it was time to go before things got even worse. He returned to his tiny shelter, alone. But the next moment, a strange noise echoed. It sounded like someone had broken in through the window. James knew all too well what kind of people lurked around these shelters. In desperation, people could do anything. He shouted loudly toward the bathroom, warning that he was armed and dangerous. In truth, aside from his guitar, he didn't even have a kitchen knife. He could only grab his worn-out shoe as a weapon, cautiously moving toward the bedroom. Yet the noise came again, this time from behind. Without hesitation, James dashed into the kitchen, ready to fight for his life. But as his eyes scanned the room, it was empty. It was all a false alarm. It turned out the intruder was a hungry cat that had slipped in through the kitchen window and was devouring James's last bit of cereal. Despite its stray appearance, the cat was surprisingly friendly. James, unable to resist its charm, didn't chase it away. Instead, he poured his last bottle of milk into a bowl, letting the cat enjoy a decent meal. He knew all too well what it meant to be starving. That night, in the long hours of solitude, James was grateful for the tiny, wandering life keeping him company. But deep down, he thought, surely someone must be waiting for this cat to return home. Guiding it back out, he was surprised when the cat lingered, reluctant to leave.
One night, okay?
It purred contentedly as James strummed his guitar, the song tinged with melancholy and sadness. When the tune ended, James said good night to the cat and retreated to his bedroom. Quietly, the cat climbed onto his bed, and together, man and cat endured the long, cold night. The next morning, James carried the cat around the shelter area, asking if anyone had lost it. But the answers were all the same. People here struggled to survive themselves. Who could afford to keep a cat? James realized that the cat was a stray. Though he had grown fond of it, James chose to let it go. He was no different from anyone else here, barely scraping by with no means to care for a pet. But what James didn't know was that this seemingly ordinary cat was about to change his broken life. That day, Nothing went right. He had just found a good spot to sing when security shooed him away, claiming he was a safety and health hazard. After a whole day's effort, James had barely earned a few coins. He returned home, feeling utterly dejected, only to find the cat had been waiting for him all along, with fresh, bleeding wounds on its body. He rushed to wrap the cat in his jacket, but with no one around, he didn't know who to turn to.
Wait, I have a hurt cat here.
Luckily, a girl named Betty, also living in the shelter, offered her help. Though she lived there as well, her room was decorated with such care and charm that it didn't resemble the home of someone struggling to make ends meet. After a quick check, Betty confirmed the cat needed a hospital.
It sounds expensive.
Can you put a price on that?
Oh, no, he's not my cat. I mean, I just found him. I think it's like a stray or, I don't know.
He is telling me he was put here to be with you. Reading his spirit loud and clear. He came to you for a reason.
Knowing James had no money, she recommended a charity veterinary clinic that could treat the cat for free. Betty had many other rescued animals, but ironically, she was allergic to fur despite loving them dearly. In their casual conversation, they gave the cat a name, Bob. James rushed Bob to the hospital, only to find a long line of animals waiting for treatment. He waited for several hours, missing the peak time for street busking, which meant another night of going to bed hungry. Thankfully, even as a charity, the doctors took their work seriously, and Bob cooperated perfectly through his treatment. However, when it came time to get the medicine, James was stuck. The treatment was free, but the medication was expensive. He needed to pay for at least a week's supply or Bob wouldn't recover. James emptied his pockets of every coin he had, begging the receptionist for help, but it was clearly impossible. Left with no choice, he pulled out the large bill his father had given him. Looking at Bob in his arms, James finally handed over the money, but having never owned a pet, James had no idea how to give medicine to a cat. In his panic, not only did he fail, but he almost got bitten by the frightened Bob. Fortunately, in Betty's skilled hands, Bob swallowed the pill obediently. Even his neutering surgery went smoothly. Through Bob, James and Betty gradually grew closer. They began to ask each other how they had ended up here. Betty didn't go into details, but she said she hated addicts the most. There were too many of them in the shelter.
Did you end up here?
I'm a musician. I write songs and play.
Yeah?
Yeah, I haven't exactly been discovered yet.
James told her his parents divorced when he was very young. At 17, with nothing but a guitar and big dreams, he left Australia for the UK, hoping to pursue music and reconnect with his father. But reality was harsh, and he ended up sleeping on the streets. Though these words were true, James still lied. He was indeed a street musician, but the real reason his father rejected him, why his stepmother avoided him, and why he couldn't hold a proper job was because James was an addict, the worst kind among the homeless. He used substances to numb his failures, pushing away family and work alike. Even though he always said he wanted to quit, whenever his friend Baz brought out that stuff, he couldn't resist falling back into the abyss. The next day, the police found James passed out in an unlocked car, the same place they had snuck into the night before. Baz ran off, leaving James behind. When James woke up again, he found himself staring at a familiar ceiling. This wasn't the first time. His apologies, full of regret and frustration, were words Val had heard countless times. She told James that if it ever happened again, it would cost him his life. Val, a doctor, had never given up on James. Even when everyone else had, she still believed in him, because in his songs, in that patched-up guitar he refused to sell even when starving, she saw a glimmer of hope. Despite his constant relapses, Val helped him secure a spot in a charity shelter. There, James had a soft couch, endless hot water, and finally, a roof over his head. And now, he also had Bob. James told Val everything about Bob and Betty, but Val wasn't pleased. She reminded him that emotional entanglements were dangerous. Too much too soon could throw James off balance. Val was right. What James needed most was stability, weekly checkups and medication adherence. The shelter provided safety, but also temptations. A single lapse could drag James back into the darkness. The next day, James set out with his guitar to busk, but Bob insisted on following him. James grumbled, telling Bob to stay in the complex. He couldn't sing and watch the cat at the same time. But Bob sneaked onto the bus at the last second. Passengers were immediately charmed by the cute cat, reaching out to pet him. Bob, not seeing James, darted upstairs and jumped right into his arms. Left with no choice, James took Bob along to the city center. A kind bus conductor even gave him a shoelace. Using it along with his own, James fashioned a makeshift leash. It was simple, but it symbolized that Bob was no longer a stray. To keep Bob from running wild, James let him climb onto his shoulder. Their unique look quickly attracted a crowd. People stopped to pet Bob, take photos, and children were especially drawn to the adorable cat. Because of Bob, street performing turned into a real show, with more and more people gathering around. Unsurprisingly, they earned a lot that day. James and Bob celebrated with a high five. Hunger would be a thing of the past. At that moment, an elderly woman walked over.
Mine wouldn't leave my side to his last breath. You got yourself a lifelong partner there. Better friends than people they are. Believe me.
Her words confirmed to James that Bob was truly the miracle in his life. All of this was seen by Baz from the shadows. As night fell, James enjoyed the most lavish dinner he'd had in years. He even bought Bob a brand new leash. But the next morning, as soon as James stepped out, he ran into Baz, who had been waiting.
Come on, anything. I had a bit of hard lanes, man. James, please. Please, James.
James wanted to refuse him, but remembering their past, he gave Baz his largest bill, begging him to buy food, not anything else. He knew if Baz used the money wrong, it would be his downfall. Christmas Eve arrived and more people came to see James and Bob. He no longer worried about daily survival. The elderly lady even prepared a Christmas gift for Bob, a beautiful new scarf. Everything seemed to be getting better. James slowly regained the confidence he had lost long ago. With newfound courage, he invited Betty to Christmas Eve dinner. Betty happily accepted. It was destined to be a warm night.
Life must be good.
Yeah, well, it feels like I'm joining the real world after all these years, you know.
Meaning?
Though James almost slipped up, remembering Betty's hatred of addicts, he decided to keep his past a secret. He planned to hold on until he truly turned his life around, letting his shameful past fade away. To prepare for Christmas the next day, James bought plenty of canned fish for Bob and a bouquet of flowers for Betty. He was falling for Betty without even realizing it. But on the way home, James saw something he least wanted to see. Baz was collapsed on the ground, surrounded by scattered syringes.
Baz, wake up. Can somebody call an ambulance? Call an ambulance.
You're on the way.
Baz, come on. Wake up.
Hearing his cry for help, Betty rushed over. Without hesitation, she directed James to call an ambulance and immediately performed CPR on Baz. Her swift actions showed this wasn't her first time. Unfortunately, despite the ambulance arriving as quickly as possible, Baz couldn't be saved. Betty saw the question in James's eyes and decided not to hide anymore. Her brother had once been an addict, too. Her brother had always been everything to Betty, and the paintings hanging in her room were all his work. He was Betty's teacher, protector, and mentor. They were the closest of siblings, but were separated forever because of illicit substances. Since then, Betty had hated every addict, not for what they did to themselves, but for how they hurt everyone who loved them. Her words left James completely shaken. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to betray Betty's love. He didn't want to lose Bob or the fragile happiness he had finally found. The next day, James rushed to find Val. But Val knew that the more anxious he was, the less likely he'd succeed. She told him to be patient and wait until after Christmas to make a proper plan. James and Betty spent Christmas together. Without money for a Christmas tree, they decorated a floor lamp with colorful streamers instead. James gave Betty a bracelet, not expensive, even a little cheap, but Betty loved it. Of course, there was also a gift for Bob. And of course, her brother's paintings were an essential part. Betty, who couldn't sing, softly hummed along as James strummed his guitar. Sitting by the river at sunset, James had the impulse to kiss Betty, but in the end, they simply held each other's hands tightly. On Betty's wrist was a tattoo of her brother's name, a bittersweet memory of happiness and eternal regret. That evening, James cleaned himself up and made a bold decision. Since Bob was so well loved, he would bring Bob to his father's house for Christmas Eve. But as fate would have it, both of his half-sisters were allergic to cat fur.
Chris, leave it! Happy New Year.
But she's allergic.
I know.
The moment Bob entered, their screams sent him running in a panic. In the chaos, James accidentally shattered his stepmother's cherished vase, and the Christmas tree, covered in starry lights, came crashing down. Christmas Eve was ruined by James and Bob, forcing them to leave in embarrassment, but that was only the beginning of James's misfortunes. On New Year's Day, James went back to busking as usual. A large dog approached silently, clearly with bad intentions. James quickly shielded Bob and stepped back, hoping the owner would control his pet. But to his shock, the owner let the dog urinate directly on James's backpack in front of everyone. Even the bystanders couldn't bear to watch, but the thug felt provoked. As the situation escalated, the two sides quickly came to blows, while James could only hold on to Bob tightly. Luckily, the police arrived in time, and neither James nor Bob were hurt. The surveillance footage proved that James wasn't at fault, but because of his status, he was still banned from busking on the streets for 6 months. Yet none of that mattered to James. He only cared if Bob was safe. Without his medication on time, James's emotions teetered on the edge of collapse. He rushed into a pharmacy, gulping down his pills desperately, unaware that Betty was standing behind him. When he turned around, James froze. Betty knew exactly what kind of pills those were.
Around addicts, I told you that. It's too much. I can't do it. And I wasn't shading the truth.
James explained that he lost control only because he wanted to protect Bob. He had to get back to Bob immediately. But he missed the point. Without busking, he had no income. How would he survive the next 6 months? To get through the coming days, James found a job selling newspapers at a street stand through Val's recommendation. The job had only one rule: never sell papers on someone else's turf, or he'd be fired immediately. As it turned out, Bob was James's lucky charm. Whether busking or selling newspapers, the unique sight of a man with a cat on his shoulder attracted people instantly. For just a small amount of money, passersby could take a photo with Bob and get a free magazine. Who could resist? One day, a reporter noticed James and Bob snapped a photo, and their story made the news. But James's fate was never smooth. The old-timers at the newspaper stand envied his success. One day, as James passed by their territory, Bob's fans eagerly came up for photos, asking to buy a magazine. James, knowing the rules, kindly asked them to purchase from the stand's regular vendor. But the fans didn't care, slipping money into James's pocket anyway. That was all the excuse his rivals needed. Though the supervisor knew the real story, she had to make an example of James to appease the old staff. And so, James was banned from selling papers for another month. Trouble kept piling up, and James lost all sources of income. With no other choice, he had to ration the little food he had, sharing a single can with Bob. 3 meals became 2, sometimes only 1, and on some days, nothing at all. Occasionally, he would find a few coins in a phone booth or line up early to receive a charity meal, but the coins kept getting fewer and fewer. A month that used to pass in a blink now felt endlessly long. If it were just him going hungry, James could endure it. But seeing Bob endure hunger broke James's heart. Desperate, James took risks, busking in subway corners, hidden alleyways, anywhere the police might not catch him. When Betty heard that James had ignored the rules and gone back to busking, she was both angry and heartbroken, not knowing how to deal with the mess in front of her.
What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to eat?
I don't know. I don't know.
What do you want me to do? Just erase the last 20 years of my life and start over?
I don't know.
I would if I could.
Who shouts like this in public? Junkies do. And the people who fall in love with them, that's who.
Neither James nor Betty had ever imagined that their first confession to each other would happen in such a way. Both of them struggled to calm down, unable to find the courage to face each other again. Finally, after a long month, James got his job back. As more and more people started to pay attention, the media took notice of them as well, including Mary, the editor of a publishing house, who often supported him during his busking performances. One day, a well-dressed woman approached asking if she could adopt Bob. She promised a better environment, better conditions, and better food. More importantly, she said her son adored Bob, and if necessary, she could pay. Every word she spoke carried thinly veiled contempt for James, treating Bob like a commodity. James couldn't bear it and snapped back with the same cold tone. The woman's face instantly darkened. She slammed James's magazines to the ground. The loud noise startled Bob, who leapt from James's shoulder in fright. In the midst of the busy traffic, dangers lurked everywhere, and a dog was still chasing after Bob. James rushed to stop him, but was a step too late. This city was too big. James searched everywhere, asking around from day to night, but Bob was nowhere to be found. Val advised James not to be alone during this time, Losing control could drag him back to his old ways. She also told him to prepare for the possibility that Bob might never return. After all, some things in life appear out of nowhere and vanish just as suddenly. In the following days, James couldn't bring himself to work. He was restless, and the temptations outside seemed to be calling out to him. One night, lost in a daze, James approached those familiar dangers, tempted to drown out his pain. But at the last moment, he stopped.
The ginger cat. Have you seen it anywhere?
He almost fell back into the abyss. When he returned home and looked back, there was Bob, waiting patiently. The miracle of reunion moved James deeply. He silently vowed never to part with Bob again. The next day, James resolutely went to the clinic, fully prepared to stop his medication. Betty warned him to be ready. It would be like the worst flu of his life, only 100 times worse. Every minute would be a battle against himself, but if he could survive a week, he'd see the light. For the old James, this sounded impossible. But James told Val that, because of Bob, even those who once looked down on him now called him Bob's owner, with respect. No one had ever called him Sir before. Bob had shown him another side of life. Finally, James stood before Betty's door. He knew she was inside. She knew exactly what the next few days would bring. As James turned to leave, Betty opened the door. She told him to stock up on food. Any excuse to go out could be a trap. If needed, she would bring him meals and lock his door herself. But James refused. He didn't want Betty to see him at his worst. Besides, he had Bob to keep him in check. As Val said, the process was much harder than James had imagined. At first, he distracted himself with his guitar, fiddling with rubber bands. But unlike internet or alcohol addiction, this was not just a mental struggle. It was even more a physical torment. It felt like he was riding a bike nonstop. Even lying down, his legs wouldn't straighten. His body and mind teetered on the edge of collapse with constant nausea, vomiting, and hallucinations. His senses dulled. Hot or cold, he couldn't tell the difference. In addition, there were the uncontrollable wails, as if consumed by raging fire, yet also like drowning in a deep, endless abyss. Even as James, half-crazed, threw things at the walls, Bob stayed by his side, watching quietly. His silent presence was both a companion and a constant reminder. Then, on an ordinary morning, James woke up. The sunlight that day felt different, warmer, brighter. With Bob curled in his arms, James lifted his head and saw a new glimpse of life. Val was proud of him. They hugged tightly. Perhaps Val, too, carried unspeakable pain deep inside, which was why she devoted herself to this special kind of work. But James had finally found his way through the fog. He wanted to share the good news with Betty, but found a moving truck parked outside her home.
Going home for a while.
Right.
I can't stay here. It's not my life. It was my brother's and I need to move on.
Betty was genuinely happy for James, thanking him sincerely, because it was James who had helped her walk out of her own shadows. James was afraid this goodbye might be their last. Before parting, Betty gave him a handmade gift. She also gave James her home address and phone number, letting him know he was always welcome to visit her. The third person James wanted to see was his father. He had no other requests. He simply wanted his father to know and to apologize for the past. Unexpectedly, his father's eyes filled with tears. He pulled out a worn, yellowed photo from his wallet. It was a picture of James as a child. The photo was crumpled, creased from being carried for years.
I didn't give up on you. I'm the one who needs to apologize. No,
Jack, what are you doing out there?
I'm talking to my son. And my grandson.
Soon after, Mary approached James with a proposal. They planned to publish a book telling the story of James and Bob, an almost impossible miracle meant to inspire and heal others facing hardships. In the winter of 2012, a street cat named Bob became a global sensation, selling over 1 million copies and being translated into 25 languages. From that moment, James and Bob no longer had to perform on the streets. They finally found happiness and stability. Everything James had once lost returned to him in a different form. But what made this story truly precious was that it was based on real events. At the end of the film, the real James appeared on screen, and Bob, being Bob, played himself throughout the entire movie. The director had tried 6 other cats as stand-ins, but none could match Bob. Bob remained loyally perched on James's shoulder, traveling the world, and together they worked to raise awareness for homelessness and animal welfare. Everyone who witnessed or heard their story was deeply moved, often to tears. Videos of their street performances captured by passers-by spread widely across the internet. But life is always fleeting. In June 2020, Bob tragically passed away in an accident. Upon hearing the news, the government honored Bob with a bronze statue in Islington Green, London. James was devastated, unable to accept the loss. Once again, he stood at a crossroads in life. A hungry, frail, stray cat. A man who had lost all hope. Some say Bob used his 13 years of life to change the course of James's destiny. But didn't James also spend 13 years ensuring that Bob would never be astray again? He was a homeless man, but his cat was not. James was both an unfortunate and a fortunate man. His troubled childhood led him astray, but his kindness and refusal to give up pushed him toward a new life. That year, he didn't just rescue a kitten. He saved a frightened child curled up in a corner, lost after making mistakes. He appeared on the darkest days of your life, when no one believed in you. He didn't care about your appearance, your money, your past, your mistakes, or your future. He simply stayed by your side, without crying, without smiling, without making a sound. And suddenly, life seemed to shift. People started to greet you, applaud for you, stop for you, even feel sorrow for you. You thought he was a messenger from heaven. You thought your life had been forgiven. But in truth, you had simply given yourself a chance for the part of you that, no matter how bad things were, still longed for a better future, a chance that was always within reach.